Welcome to Sunday Sessions, Ayub ji.
Thank you so much, Prateebha ji.
Would you like to say hello to our audience before we begin?
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I'm here with Prateebha ji, and we will be talking about migration and development. And we'll be talking about other issues as well that are linked with migration and economy, but not in a very conventional way. I think, Prateebha ji, this is something that we need to be clear about it. That here we will be not talking about specifically about X number of remittances, turning into Y number of development. We will be not talking that way. We'll be talking in an unconventional way about migration and economy. So yeah, we are here to talk about that.
Okay, we might sort of go into figures once in a while, but it will not be an interview that's specifically focused on figures, because Sunday Sessions is more about having a very slow, simple conversation with people from different walks of life, and it's about exploring ideas and also talking about being and becoming and about just being, so so welcome to Sunday Sessions, and thank you everyone for joining us, those of you who have joined us this afternoon. So going back to welcoming my guest speaker here today. So Ayub ji, you were in Lumbini recently and you just came back to Kathmandu a couple of days ago, right? Would you like to begin by telling us how it is to travel during this time of these really weird times that we're living in? How is it to travel during a pandemic?
I mean, traveling these days is very hectic, very exhausting. And it's not that easy, or it's not normal, okay, that as we used to travel before. I had to travel to Lumbini 2 months ago because I was here since last many months. And then it was Eid time for us. And my family wanted me there too. So I got an opportunity, and then I went home. While I was going there, it was legally, or it was kind of, it has something to do with logistics too. It was not that easy. Okay, you are buying a ticket or you are booking a vehicle and you are going. So you had to take some permission from administration and everything. So I went that way.
And how, if I may interrupt you, how did you travel? Like when you were going, what was your means of traveling? And
I had a vehicle and I went with that. I went alone. Yeah.
And then when you came back? Because the domestic flights had resumed when you came back, so I'm just wondering.
By then. So I came via flight. Yeah, so I came via flight. It was fully booked. It was kind of, I think, not even a single seat was left vacant in that. Social distancing as per se was only that, okay, you cannot commute inside the aisle of that aeroplane. Otherwise, every seat was booked. So airlines do try to kind of make sure that they are, social distancing norms are, adhered by the people. So, having only allowing only 25% of the flights to kind of to move and so on. They have their own guidelines. So that way they ensure that, okay, the social distancing are maintained. Otherwise, in the flight, okay, all the seats are booked.
So, domestic airlines are a really important means of commute in our country, especially for people who live in the mountains, right? Because we're not well connected by road. It is also true for some other places in the non-mountainous areas as well. I'm just wondering, in terms of the kind of people you're traveling with, like who were your fellow travelers? Were they mostly people who were moving around for work, do you think, or were they people who were moving around for other reasons? I'm just asking out of curiosity.
Yeah, I cannot make a kind of an absolute judgment about that, but what I could see is that there are families, they were also traveling with kids. So what I could notice is that people are moving because of the festive season too. So it was not just that, okay, people were there and they were coming back for work, because those who were there, they just wanted to stay their homes because the festive season is just approaching us. So it was that, okay, there might be people who are there and they wanted to come back to Kathmandu, maybe just like me who had work here. Yeah, even coming to Kathmandu does not ensure that you are going to work, because I mean, still, even though I am in Kathmandu, I have to work from home. I mean, you mentioned something like, okay, domestic flights are key means for traveling. This morning I was in a workshop, and there was a gentleman who mentioned that he traveled to Lumbini 52 years ago. And 52 years ago, while he traveled to Lumbini, the only means of, I mean, going there was flight. Okay. So 52 years ago, we did not have road connecting to Lumbini, but we had a flight that connected, okay, to Lumbini. Of course, that airport is not in the Lumbini. From airport, we have to travel under 18 kilometers to Lumbini. So that gentleman, now, I mean, a very old man, he traveled to Lumbini 52 years ago, and the only means of, I mean, going there was aeroplane.
So by the time you were growing up, though, in Lumbini was already connected by road, right, to other parts of the country.
Yeah.
When you were growing up in Lumbini.
Yeah, by the time I was growing, Lumbini was connected with roads. Yeah, even my village was connected with road. By the time I was growing, but I mean, when I heard these stories that my father's, okay, for the people of, yeah, his generation, okay, they shared with us. So they used to, when they were of my age, yeah, I mean, when they were in their early 30s, they had to commute to Bhairwa or Butwal, okay, these cities. Bhairwa is, I mean, that is 35 kilometers from my village. Okay, they had to travel, okay. I mean, they had to commute on their own because there was no road connectivity. And then initially, I mean, you'll find these things in the literature as well. For example, Pankaj Mishra writes about Buddha, and then he makes a visit to Lumbini. And then he describes Lumbini in his, I mean, a very important book, yeah, on Buddha. So he describes about Lumbini and everything about that. So he brings a, yeah, he captures the situation there, or the kind of how people live there, or the title of your thing, like being and becoming, the state of being that was there of people, or of economy, everything. He mentioned very brilliantly that we did not have road. Even when we had road, that road was not, I mean, okay, it had boulders in it. I mean, all the, I mean, okay, uh, yeah, it was very, yeah, crude road that we had.
So then obviously I'm just thinking of what we talked about in our earlier conversations. So obviously for many people who are growing up alongside you and for yourself, so the best means for education, because of transport, would be to go to India, right? And then, so you spent a big chunk of your life being gaining your education in India, right?
I mean, that requires a bit of deconstruction or explaining. For example, my village is around 15 kilometers north of that Indian border. So it is very difficult to commute to India in order to get regular education. So I used to go to the school or madrasa that was in my village. So I studied in that, okay, up to primary level. But the people who are exactly on the border side, okay, for example, their village is connected with India, or the people or the villagers in India whose villages are connected with the borders of Nepal. So that interconnectivity is, I mean, from the both side. For example, it is just last year that I mean, I with my colleagues visited some part of border, and some young girls were coming from India. So I mean, when we inquired, we found that they went to, I mean, school. So the schools that are on the other side, I mean, on our side of the border, people from the other side, from India, also come to those schools. So it is kind of, okay, that is there. But in my case, or people in my villages, it was not that way. I mean, when we hear the stories that, okay, people of my father's generation, so they used to go to India to study, and they used to live there, because commuting 15 kilometers, of course, border is 15 kilometers. Then again, you had to travel some 10 to 15 kilometers inside that India. So that was not that much feasible. Yeah.
Yeah, but you did spend a big chunk of your life getting educated in
Yeah,
India.
after primary education, I went to India. I went to Delhi. And from very early education till my masters, I did everything in India. Like Jamia Millia is a central university in Delhi. Then South Asian University, which is a SARC project. Nepal has its own share in that. 4% of everything Nepal owns in that. So I studied there. That is also in Delhi. So I studied there. Yeah, from my, after primary school to schooling to, masters, I studied there.
And you mentioned earlier on in one of our conversations that you came to Kathmandu when you're a full-grown man, not as a child, right? So I was just wondering, would you like to share that experience of like how it was for you to come here, and then what were some of your first-hand experiences at that time?
When I was doing my masters, I had friends from Nepal, and then, they kind of, I won't say persuaded, but they were kind of reason that I came back to Nepal. They were very lovely people. They are still very lovely people. So they suggested me that, okay, I should come to Nepal. I should come to Kathmandu, and we will be here together. We will find work. We will work there. So after completing my masters, of course, I went home, spent a month or two. Not 2 months. 1.5 months I spent there, and then I came back to Kathmandu. Stayed with them, okay, and and I spent some time here, and then I got job. So one of the things about that I should mention here is that I spent quite a bit of time in India. Like, okay, when I was growing or going to India, or anybody who is there, okay, on the border side. For example, if you go to Butwal, people from Butwal also go to India for their regular shopping. So the radio station that are there in Bharwa or Butwal, okay, they do advertisements of the shops that are in India, okay, that are inside Indian border, and they do that in Nepali. So that across border thing is very common there.
That's interesting.
So I used to go to India when I was in my village too, before going to Delhi. But I spent there quite a bit of time in India. But that was a place, okay, where I spoke a language that I was comfortable in, and everything. Unless and until I mentioned my citizenship there, nobody even bothered to ask where I belong from. Okay, but that sense of belonging that happens at times. Okay, I will not feel it there. While when I came to Kathmandu, something happened, and I was just walking down, and I was on a flyover. Okay, that flyover, and I was just looking at around. Okay,
where was this? Like exactly where in Kathmandu?
It was that Ratna Park one, and I just realized that, okay, this is my country, and yeah, this is where I belong. So that was the thing. That was an emotional thing. By that time, I could not speak even a single word of Nepali when I came to. There are people, if they're listening or watching us, they will. They will recall how my Nepali was. Okay, or I was literally literate about Nepali language when I came to. But apart from all those things, I realized that this is my country and this is where I belong. Of course, that has some childhood experiences too. That why I felt that. But yeah, that's what I felt. So that was an emotional moment.
At this point, I must share that Ayubji and I worked alongside as colleagues for a couple of years in a media organization in Kathmandu. And of course, in the organization, we were always made fun of for how terrible our Nepali is. And mine is quite bad as well. So yeah, and sometimes in jest, I have told Ayubji, it's it gives me some consolation because my Nepali is better than yours. Because yeah, of course, your Nepali is you're still getting there, right? You learned to speak Nepali quite late in life, and I think you still do a marvelous job for how late you started learning to speak this language. So yeah, yeah. Okay, that's interesting. And yeah, from that, Ayubji, I'll just move us on to because I mentioned that we're working alongside it. It made me think of these tea conversations we had, and how often we disagreed and argued over a lot of issues. And I think they were quite interesting conversations. But also, I saw recently in a tweet you mentioned in a tweet that quite decent conversations happen around these tea shops in Kathmandu, right? And I remember you also talking about how there is this whole economics around the culture of drinking tea.
Yeah, I mean, my tweet was, regarding a bit of, that came after the US presidential debate and when I was watching that. So I just realized that what kind of debates we have in our tea shops and the significance of tea shops in our life. I'm not talking about just tea. Tea and tea shops have two different connotations here. Like we have tea at our places, at our homes, we have tea with our family members. But at times we just go to tea shops, okay, for other reasons too. Okay, maybe we just want to hang out with people, our friends, okay. And in Kathmandu, that has a different connotation. I mean, these are my experience that I saw. Uh, and when I see that from my part of the world, my part of the world means the Lumbini area. So I find tea shops have more significance there. People there spend quite a lot of time in tea shops. Uh, those tea shops at times become, just like parliament. People debate there. People talk about politics, and at times those tea shops become places where decisions are made. Okay, so
What
those tea
kind of
shops are.
decisions?
I mean, about the village. Okay, what kind of activities are going to happen in the village? Okay, villages. So the narrative, at least the tea shops are an influential place or a space where the narratives are being built. The tea shop in the villages are just like Twitter. Okay, so on Twitter,
Interesting.
you talk about a lot of things, and Twitter is also being accused of or blamed for, not being on the ground. So okay, not having the reality that are happening exactly in the with the real people. Well, in the tea shops as well, that is, exclusively, in tea shop, that I'm talking about, exclusively men. Okay, and then they talk about all the issues there. Okay, and they make decision. If not decision, at least narratives are being set there. Okay, so people set narratives. If you want to be a politician, you have to set your credentials in these places, and that becomes addictive too. Going to the tea shops, you might just have tea at your home. That was the, way better tea that you can get in a tea shop, but still you'll go to the tea shop because you have to show your presence that you are there. Okay,
It's a very political space, right? Tea shops in Nepal
yeah.
is a very political space. You just mentioned that it's a very meal space as well. And I'm going to just share this experience I had around a tea shop, which was also incidentally in Sanipa, very close to my previous workplace. And so I was sitting there with a female friend and colleague who was smoking, and we're both drinking tea. And at this other table was this gentleman, this man, who was also sitting by himself drinking tea. And throughout this conversation we're having, I sort of noticed that he would glance at us once in a while. And and so we're just there. And the moment he finished his tea, he went, he paid, and then he came and stood by us, and he said, and I'll say this in Nepali, and then I will offer a translation. And he said, "Laz लाग्दैन दुईजना केटीहरू यसरी चिया पसलमा बसेर गफ गरिरहनलाई?" He said, "Aren't you ashamed of yourselves? You're two girls sitting here in a tea shop having a conversation." And he walked off after just blurting those words out. And we were like, what just happened? We didn't even have a chance to understand what had happened, And then after he had walked out, we suddenly realized that, this is what had happened. Like, he had actually, but I don't know how to even describe this, but he just,
Yeah, I get that.
and so tea spaces in Nepal are a place that is political, but also very tightly knit around our economy, right? And I find it so interesting that you were also talking at one point about what the former Indian president said about tea culture, and how it's related to economy and migration.
It was not the president, though he was the president of Indian National Congress. He was Maulana Abdul Kalam Azad, somebody who was madly in love with tea. So he wrote a letter from prison to his friend Ram Malik. Okay. Where he was talking about tea, and then he mentioned that, okay, like tea was initially an exploration or invention of Chinese, but in their invention or in their imagination, they had not even remotely thought that people at some point of time are going to mix or pollute this pious thing with sugar or tea. But when
sugar or milk,
came
you mean?
Sugar and milk. And when the Britishers came to India, they started putting some milk and some sugar in it. And then we Indians copied from them. And we started putting some tea in sugar and milk. So, this is how things changed. But
that's what he said in the letter.
Yeah. He talked a lot of things about tea. The whole letter, dedicated about tea. And that letter is, a collection of, is in the collection of a book called Gubari Khatir. There is no contention among, the people of Urdu literature that book has any secondary influence. That book is, seen as the most important Urdu literature. So in that book, this letter is there where he talks about these things.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that, Ayubji. Yeah, I wanted to sort of touch upon these things because I know as a lecturer of economics, you also use these very day-to-day practical experiences we have, such as tea or other examples to teach your students, right? But from that also, I think we sort of want to move on to more of the work that you've been doing. So you have been doing a lot of research around migration in Nepal and in terms of also the remittance economy. So I just wondering, for the benefit of our audience, would you like to sort of walk us through the migrant trajectory in the Gulf countries and how it has evolved for Nepal or Nepali workers?
Nepal is a country that has, since ages, has experience of migration. For example, the very term Lahore comes from that when, Nepali people used to travel to Lahore. Okay, Lahore, that's in Pakistan these days, for work or for kind of community. So Nepali people since ages are traveling, okay, or are migrating. And many of them are there in the armies, Indian armies, British army. They are there. I'm not getting into that. That's not a part of my research. But apart from that, the only, corridor that Nepal had, or the only destination Nepal has, was India. If we are going beyond 1980s, okay. So before 1980s, India was the only destination where our people used to go for work, in search of work. From the from the 1980s, okay, especially in the mid 80s, it started. Some people went to Middle East, and then after 1991, Nepali people started going to these countries in masses, and that has a reason behind that. I talked about that in my piece as well, that how Nepal became a beneficiary of international migration. So one of the things is that we know that the Gulf countries, some countries, okay, Iraq, Kuwait, these were fighting, and so we call that Gulf War. And Saudi Arabia and other countries were there were proxies in that war too. So what had happened is that Saudi Arabia had huge number of Yemeni population. So in that Gulf War, around 2 million workers were expelled from Gulf countries, those who were from the Arabic-speaking countries, or kind of from the same Gulf countries, because all the Gulf countries are not affluent. Some of the Gulf countries are extremely affluent. At the same time, others are not that affluent. So those countries that are not that affluent, they were going to those countries to in search of work. So countries, they started expelling those workers who belonged from countries that were not politically or diplomatically favorable to them. So for example, Saudi Arabia expelled a lot of Yemeni people, and Yemeni people in Saudi Arabia were just like Indians working in Nepal or Nepalese working in India. just minus the lingual differences, because we Nepalese, even though we understand and speak Nepali, yeah, Hindi, but I mean, there are some differences. While that part of Yemen and Saudi Arabia, they were kind of, they spoke almost same dialects of the language, of the Arabic language too. So when they were expelled, they wanted some strangers who can work for them. Okay, when I say stranger means the people who cannot speak their language, because that Arabicness has in itself a kind of is I mean, that is not a nationalistic thing, but that is something called, okay, because the Arabic people, for non-Arabs, they have a technical term that is called Ajami. Okay. For all the non-Arabic people, they call Ajamis. Okay. And they have a pride of themselves of being Arabs. So they wanted non-Arab people, or they wanted Ajami people, okay, who do not speak their language, or who are not part of their culture. So politically or diplomatically, they do not have any threat from these people. So I mean, they wanted people from South Asia, and they wanted people from Nepal. I mean, they wanted people from East Asia as well. So I mean, we started sending people to these countries. So that's how it evolved.
And since then, I think it's only been the number of people going to work in the Gulf countries has only been increasing over the years, right? And while the number of people working in India is also like still intact, and I think we have like over 50,000 people working in India, whereas we also have another 4 lakhs people working in the Gulf nations as well as Malaysia. It's a very big number. But also with the start of the pandemic, we saw how the migrant workers, Nepali migrant workers, were the worst affected of the people in the country, right? We saw all these people who were stranded in the border, and we also saw all these other people who wanted to come back home from other countries, but they could not for many different reasons. But one of them also being the fact that they did not have access to resources or language, and they were already living in very unsanitary conditions, right? And we repeatedly talked about how little our government was doing to really protect our people. And you mentioned the Gulf War early on, and also how also how I think in one of your pieces in the Kathmandu Post, you talk about how India was able to sort of respond to protecting its citizens who are working in these countries when the war broke out, right? But I think we haven't seen that kind of response from our government, and we're always criticizing our government for it. How would you sort of, I will not say deconstruct, but how do you view what has happened in terms of the migration situation in Nepal since the start of the pandemic?
Before getting into it, I would like to, bring your attention to some numbers. I mean, in Gulf, it is not only 4 lakh people. 4 lakh people are only in Qatar, or more than that. So in Gulf countries, there are, something of similar number are in Saudi Arabia too. So Gulf has more than, I guess, more than a million workers from Nepal. So, and it is not only 50,000 people who are working in India. We do not have any, we have different sources of data, that suggest how many people are there in India, but the collective understanding or the collective agreement is that we do not have any scientific data or authentic data that suggests how many people are there in India. There are some people who claim that there are exaggeration goes up to, I won't say that exaggeration, I take my word back, but there are some people who say that there are 5 million people who work in India, but we do not have any data. But from remittance point of view, we can talk something about that. So getting back to that, what's happening with migrant workers these days? When the Gulf War broke out, India repatriated its worker back then. Even though the situation of Indian economy back then was very bad, India did not have adequate money to bring its workers back to its country. But still, the prime minister of that country decided to bring their workers back. And India had that cloud to bring their workers back, okay, especially the workers who were there in Kuwait. So the people the Indian people who were working in Kuwait at that time, their repatriation had to, engage Iraq as well. Iraq was a country that was, actively fighting the war. Iraq helped India India to get its people back to India. Okay, so that was the situation. But when this pandemic broke, neither Nepal nor India could bring its people back to their country. Okay, in the case of Nepal, what is very outrageous is that uh, when people migrate, among the many costs that they have to bear, there are costs associated that government collects with the legal promise that if they get into any kind of trouble, any kind of bad situation, the Nepal government will bring them back, either by repatriating them back, or by any kind of provision. Nepal government will bring them back. Nepal, there is an insurance scheme too. And Nepal government, again, once they are back, if they need medical attention, Nepal government, will be paying for all those needs. So, it is very much, all these things are covered by legal provisions in that. While, this pandemic, when this started, government just kind of, how do you say that, made itself completely or absolutely free from that responsibility. While this was the typical example or typical case where that money could have been used to just bring them back, provide them, modest, whatever is needed. But Nepal government brutally failed in that, and that was something that Nepal government should not have done that. So those people who wanted to come back, they had to pay on their own, and it was something, kind of a huge injustice on them, because those people who had already, those people wanted to come back who had lost their jobs, because once you lose your job in the Middle East, in those countries, that means you are losing your accommodation too. We have a lot of kind of stories. There are people who lost kicked them out of the residence that they were in. At that time, Nepal government expects them to pay even higher amount of money to pay for their coming back. And even when they were willing to, or those who were willing to come back, Nepal government, at times failed to kind of provide the logistics too.
Ayushi, we have a question for you related to this. So I'm going to take this question now. Yeah. Question is from Ayush Shrestha Joshi, and Ayush asks, are there any evidence pieces that suggest that COVID-19 has further contributed to stigma and discrimination towards the migrant workers? How does this suggest about the social strata?
When COVID thing started, an image that reflected back that what is that, the largest corporation of the world, that is, the oil refinery of Saudi Arabia, what is called, the name is not coming to my mind, but that company had had a migrant worker. That migrant worker was given sanitizer, and that migrant worker physically going to every individual to sanitize them. How, for that individual who is going to everybody, how it becomes something, whether we are taking that from the lens of stigma or discrimination or not, but the kind of work that individual was provided, that is something very, very inhuman. When it comes about stigma, of course, there are literatures that are, emerging these days, and that talk about the stigma too. But we also find that when people are coming from, those kind of people who are coming from these countries, people do discriminate them. Just like if somebody is coming from, you have realized, when we are talking about migration, we cannot just talk about. By the way, here we are not talking about the foreign migration only, we are talking about migration too. So it was just in the news today, in Kathmandu Post, that tenants are facing huge discrimination by the landlords. Why? Landlords are kind of very much not comfortable, at least if I'm not using any negative word for that. They're not at least comfortable allowing their tenants who are coming from other part of Nepal. And at least if they happen to be coming from Madhesh, then it becomes more difficult.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was just trying to shut my window because I think my neighbor has chicken and they're making a lot of noise. And it just seems like family sessions are often being interrupted by animals. Sometimes the dogs, sometimes the chickens. Yeah, so please bear with me for the interruption. We have another question from Pranika Koyu, and I guess I should have said this at the start of the conversation, but maybe Ayubji, you can add to this now. Pranika wants to know, where can we get to read your article where you have mentioned about how Nepalese came to be migrant workers in Gulf countries?
And there's a piece in Record Nepal, so yeah, you can look at that, where I'm talking about globalization and COVID. I forgot the title, but I mean COVID-19 and globalization's labor market precarity. Yeah, that's the title where I'm talking about why this pandemic is, I mean, just revealing a precarity that has always been there. I mean, when I'm talking about this precarity, what it means, I mean, it takes to something of world order too. The world order that we are in right now treats the unskilled worker of developing or poor countries as just a kind of a factor of I mean a factor that engages in the I'm sorry, I'm bumbling too much, but they're just a factor in the economic activities. Okay, so if you look at the, I mean, World Trade Organization's various conferences, how I mean, okay, it is, I mean, it is said that the West will transfer the technology, and the people from the developing countries will be traveling and they will be providing the labor services. But the thing is that the technology or the financial services, I mean, in that article, I'm talking about a lot of things. So in the world trade, there is a thing of called comparative advantage. So the West has comparative advantage in terms of their technologies and their financial capitals, while the developing countries or poor countries like us, we do not have comparative advantage of technology or financial capital. The only, I mean, comparative advantage that we have unskilled labor or unskilled worker. Okay, so the things of their comparative advantage, they can transfer those things very easily to us without any hindrances. Those things do not require visa, but the things of comparative advantage that we have, that requires that has a lot of hurdles, that requires a lot of, I mean, logistical work, and that is, I mean, in many cases not possible for, I mean, yeah, many people. So I was talking about that precarity, and then I talked about how events like these, okay, like this pandemic, okay, impact these precarities further. I gave you example that how, I mean, Malaysia was about to recruit some 1,50,000 security guards from Nepal, and then something diplomatic happened. I mean, India stopped importing some oil from Malaysia. So Pakistan said that, okay, we will import the same amount of oil from Malaysia. Security guards from Pakistan then. So I mean, these are the precarities that,
and Nepal lost its opportunity.
So
yeah.
So that's why I use the I use the word precarity there. And I mean, this COVID just revealed what kind of precarities we have.
Right. And also just to remind us again about Pranika's question. So Pranika, you can, if you look him up, if you look Mohd Ayub up, you will be able to find his articles published in the Kathmandu Post and the Record Nepal, the Record. And yeah, and there's also there's an upcoming article on Routledge, which is something we're going to talk about in a while, because we still have a couple of questions related to the topic we're still on. So I'm going to take another question for you, Ayubji. So Sumitra Bogati, she wants to know, what can we do to push the government to repatriate and build proper facilities for migrant workers?
That's a very difficult question. I don't know how to answer that. But I mean, I'll give you some context so that we can make sense of your question on our own. I as a researcher, I do my job of, collecting data, trying to make sense of that, making inferences out of those data, and then putting that in the form of report. So there are many people who do that job, so that the people who are working in the area, they can understand what the situation. Once we understand the situation, there are people who advocate for the changes that we need to make. And those changes are being translated or being meant. We have, Department of Foreign Employment has its own acts. Okay, how it is going to function. Nepal government's its own legal provisions. It is bound to bring migrant workers back and provide them modest accommodation here. Okay, and all the facilities that they need according to the legal provisions that Nepal government has. Okay, but that is something that's not happening. So what can we do? Are we going to, are we going to, I mean, fight against government uh, by protesting or by some other means? Okay, fight is a kind of,
You mean,
some high word,
yeah,
but
oppose government response to it
yeah,
or criticize.
yeah, yeah, criticize. And this is something that we have been talking about. People write, okay, a lot of people have written about this. I myself have written about that. I also said that government should be bringing these people back. Okay, so these things are there. As we have all these things, I don't know how we are going to, what we are going to do.
What about
We almost,
in terms of sort of reintegrating the migrant workers in the economy? Because we've seen so many migrant workers who've come back, right? And they're going to, it's going to have a lot of different sorts of impact socially as well as economically for us. One of them could also be I don't know, there are more mouths to feed now, right? The moment there are more people in the country. So how do you think reintegration in the economy would go?
Reintegration is a very important area, and Nepal government also superficially talks about this. When I say superficially, they talk about a lot of things, but when it comes about practice, okay, we hardly find anything that's happening. So Nepal, largely we see that things are happening in a mechanical way. Excuse me, and not in the practical way. So reintegration becomes in that case a very important thing here. For example, if I give you some data, some statistics to understand, to make sense of why reintegration is very important. So like if you look at the data of remittances that we receive and we send to other countries, so you'll find that Nepal received some $1.3 billion from India in 2018 and 19. But can you imagine Nepal sent India $1.6 billion remittances? Okay. While it is seen that, the usual narrative is that when we say that Nepal India ka rishta roti beti ka hai, in that in that connotation, largely that Nepalese are heavily reliant on India for their rotis, while Nepal is sending more remittances to India than Nepal receives remittances from India. This thing, this reversal has happened after the Modi government came into the power. That has started. Nepal was receiving more remittances from India than Nepal was sending to India. But after 2014, that has changed. Likewise, if you look at the China corridor, in the 2018 and 19, Nepal sent China some around $144 million, something like that. Just 3 years back, it was a very tiny amount, or that was almost okay. That was very trivial. And Nepal brought remittance from China was only $7 million. Okay. So if we look at this, number, Nepal being a largely agricultural economy, okay, or a Krishi Pradhan Desh. Nepal imports rice as well from India. Nepal imports even broiler from India. Nepal imports mutton from India. Nepal, this, in spite of being a Krishi Pradhan Desh, Nepal is importing all these things.
We are heavily reliant.
Yeah. So it's not just that about remittances. Why I'm bringing these things is that it is just that the remittances that we are receiving from, these Gulf countries. Why I'm saying Gulf countries? Because Gulf, more than 50% of the remittances that we are receiving in the formal channels come from only 2 countries. That is Saudi Arabia and Qatar. Okay, and maximum share of remittances that we are receiving, it comes from these Gulf countries. All the other countries are just sending peanuts to us. Like we are only getting some around $44 million from South Korea. South Korea migration is something very much hyped. The Japan migration is something very hyped. But South Korea's contribution in total remittances to Nepal is not even 1%. So we are heavily reliant from one corridor, and with that money we again became dependent on other countries too for the very basic needs that we have, like rice, like wheat, like meat. Okay, these are the things. Being a Krishi Pradhan Desh, we can, I mean, these are things that there is something that can be grown or produced here in Nepal too. So, I mean, reintegration is something, I mean, very important, but how and where people are going to be reintegrated is something unexplored area. That is something that needs to be explored.
Okay. Ayubji, we have a lot of questions for you, so I'm going to start taking them now, okay? I mean, take the rest of the questions. We've taken a couple already. One more question from Ayush Rashtra Joshi, and he asks, any good practices in terms of addressing the economic relapse faced by migrant workers? What are the countries doing in terms of migrant economic recovery? What can Nepal learn from other countries who are in similar situations?
I mean, so far I haven't seen anything on this, that what countries are doing in terms of economic lapse that are happening. So, for example, I mean, we saw at some point of time, I think Kantipur had it on their first page. I mean, I'm sorry if I'm getting that wrong, the name of the paper, but we saw that Nepalese were again flocking to India. Okay, on the border there was a huge crowd, and people were again trying to enter to India, and the people, yeah, even the people in Nepal, those who had gone to their villages in the pandemic. After some time, people again started coming back to the cities. In the cities, uh, I mean, the people, the employer needed, their workers back. So, I mean, it started that way only. I don't see, so far, if there are, I'm not aware of that. But I mean, so far, I haven't seen that countries are doing something to compensate or mitigate the lack of, the loss of remittances. In case of Nepal, the data once, came up, and the data revealed that Nepal received more remittance this year than it had received in the same time last year. Okay, so
that's interesting.
Yeah, it is not.
Where was this data from?
That data, the authenticity of data, to me, or to people I work with, is not something, a contentious. That data is, absolutely correct.
But the one way this might have happened would only be.
But why is that coming? Because
if the money was being sent in at this particular time.
Yeah, so that can be explained in many different ways. The remittances come through illegal channels too. We call hundi. So there are other channels too that money comes to.
What are some of these channels? Can you name them for us?
Hundi is one of the channels that everybody agrees that that channel is there. So hundi is a channel that money comes with, and the other channel that when people come back on their own, they bring some money with them.
Yes.
So as the movement was completely stopped, okay. So was sent. It does not come, in terms of money, but when people come, they bring some gold as well from there. To the extent that is legally, allowed. Okay.
Yeah. So because coming home this time was quite different for a lot of uncertainty, but they were also coming in with the kind of certainty that makes you feel like, okay, you might be going home for good, right? So then you bring whatever you're bringing with you.
Yeah. So it was completely different, and for some months, migrants could not come at all.
Okay, yeah, I think we have a couple of other questions that I'm going to start reading up now. This one is from Sanj Sharma, and it says, when we talk about labor migration from Nepal, we generally ignore various layers of migrants and tend to put a blanket term, labor migrants. What kind of diversity and discrimination have you seen with the larger category of migrant workers? Who among the Nepali migrants suffer the most in the larger process of foreign labor migration? Thank you very much for this question, because this was something I was going to ask Ayubji as well. So yes, Ayubji, over to you.
For a disclosure, this is somebody, a very good friend of mine, and I learned a lot of things about migration, about Nepal from him too. Okay. So Um, I mean, there are different layers of migration in Nepal. I mean, we know. For example, if we look at Nepal, okay, like you'll find that there are some people who join army for different countries, but you will not find even a single member in that army from Madhesh part of Nepal. Okay, so you'll find that those people are coming from certain regions only, or or they belong from certain ethnicities only. Okay, then you'll find that people are going to these developed advanced countries to like South Korea and Japan. South Korea and Japan is a corridor where, I mean, again, Madheshis are, I mean, just, I mean, you will hardly find them there too. Then you will find that, okay, there are people who are going to advanced countries like USA and UK and these kind of countries. Again, you won't find that, okay, Madheshis are there too. Okay, I mean, so there are these, I mean, we have various corridors where Nepalese go, yeah, in general. And then there are corridors where specific people or from specific regions, people from specific regions of Nepal, they go to. When it comes about the vulnerability of, I mean, migrant workers who are going, so of course, the blanket labor migration, I mean, in that when we talk about, then of course we ignore the gender notion in that. For example, I mean, migration from Nepal or labor migration from Nepal is hugely, male centric thing. Mostly men migrate. Okay, and it's not that women don't want to migrate, but there are, I mean, a lot of restrictions on women's migration. And if they are not allowed to migrate via legal channels, what happens is that they try some, I mean, illegal channels too. Like they're traveling via India.
Which exposes them to more risk, obviously, but then it is happening.
Yeah, so that exposes them to higher risk too. So I mean, they become more vulnerable. Okay, so from gender lenses, women become more vulnerable to this international migration. Okay, and so in that way, the whole blanket, labor migration thing becomes problematic. We need to, I mean, bring that gender notion in that too.
Also, if I may interrupt you, Ayub, can you also sort of add on about how, I don't know, I'm just wondering about the figure in terms of ethnicity. Like what do figures suggest in terms of which region do most of the people who are working as migrant workers in the Gulf countries in Nepal coming from?
I mean, region-wise, you'll find that, it is predominantly from Madhesh. That has some reason in that. The reason being is that Madhesh is, I mean, more densely populated than Hill or Himal. Okay, so it is very much natural that more people from Madhesh are migrating. But again, I mean, as the various corridors that I mentioned from Nepal that are migrating, the one thing that is there is, I mean, Madheshi people, those who are of the Madheshi ethnicities, they are just left with these, I mean, these Gulf countries and Malaysia. They do not have, practically any other option to migrate to other countries. I mean, these days, I mean, in the recent years, something has started, but that, I mean, that will set a trend, I mean, some years later maybe, but that is not kind of a significant number. So, I mean, naturally, Madhesh being densely populated region, people from Madhesh, they migrate in huge numbers. There's a political economy reason behind that as to, I mean, we call that a political economy of recruitment too. Okay. Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons that why Madheshi people migrate in huge numbers. Okay. For example, I mean, if you see anywhere that is employment happening, employment, yeah, even if you go to banks that are, that are in Madhesh part of Nepal or Tarai part of Nepal, you'll find that most of the people that work there they are from this part of the Nepal. Okay, so I mean, anywhere you go, I mean, be that private or be that, I mean, government institution, you'll hardly find that there are people of Madhesh ethnicities. Okay, so they are, I mean, they are not left with any other option other than to migrate. The other thing is that, I mean, they have less education. I mean, I'm talking about the findings. I mean, these are not my own observations. I'm talking about the findings. So as, I mean, relatively people there in the Madhesh, they are, I mean, not that well educated. So the recruitment agencies that are functioning in Kathmandu, they find it a kind of a good business there, going there, so that they can influence them, more easily. And if something bad happens in the process of migration, those people will not have that much agency in Kathmandu to reassert their case. So the recruitment agencies that are functioning in Kathmandu, so they focus more on the Malaysia part.
And it's because of language as well as reach in terms of other social links, right? Socio-political links.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Ayubji, quite a lot of questions here.
I saw a question. Actually, I was expecting to ask that.
I'm going to.
That was about agriculture. Why we are.
Yeah, I'm going to pick these questions. I'm going to go in the order that the questions have come in. Also, I just want to say I have like a big chunk of questions set aside for you that I wanted to ask you on topic other than migration economy. But there are a lot of questions here, and I'm looking at my watch here, and it's already 3. Okay. And we normally close the conversation at 3 o'clock. But I'd like to request you to allow me to extend it for another 10 minutes. Is that all right?
Yeah, that's all right.
Okay, thank you, Ayubji. So I'm going to take this question, which is in Nepali, and it's written by Kiran Bhandari ji. And okay, I have to go closer to read this because this is in Nepali. It says, COVID-ले विश्व बजारमा रोजगारीमा अक्सर घटिरहेका छन् भन्ने बहु भइरहेको सन्दर्भमा वैदेशिक रोजगारीमा गएका युवाले नेपाल पठाउने पैसामा कति ठुलो असर पर्ने देख्नुहुन्छ? So basically, like how is the remittance economy being affected because of COVID-19, right? That's how I understood the question.
Yeah, I had mentioned about that. How the remittance figure went up, and I explained. I gave some explanation to that too. I'll share one very good experience that I had when I was home. I met a young boy whose full-time job was to collect golds and sell that in the market. Okay, so people from the Middle East, okay, because gold is cheaper there, so they used to send gold. Okay, gold that is legal. Okay, the quantity of gold that can be brought legally here. Okay, it's not that illegal thing. There are some amount of some quantity of gold that you can bring. So he had his connections, and again he used to sell that gold in the market. Okay, so the amount of remittance that we used to receive officially, from the formal channels, that has actually increased for this quarter. Okay, according to the data, the amount of remittances that we had received last year, this year we received more remittances, but that needs some deconstruction. Why? In normal situation, some remittances come through Hundi, some some money was brought by people when they were traveling back, and when people were traveling back, they used to bring goods and other stuff in kind too, and some people did business too on that, like that gold thing. So these are the things that are there. So I cannot exactly predict because I did not work on that. Okay, I do not have any figure in front of me, but there are some studies that indicate that remittance is going to decline, and remittance related, some poverty is going to happen in Nepal. Some suggest that up to 19% poverty is going to happen again. Okay, increase again.
I think the ILO said the remittance would go down by 14%. I read that somewhere, but I hope you answered, Kiranji. I hope he answered your question. And now moving on to another question. After reading the article in Record Nepal, my quick follow-up question is: these researchers on Nepal migrant workers in Gulf countries, do they have records of Nepalese who are already working in these countries during the 1980s? I'm asking this because I did have relatives who were working in Bahrain in 1986.
So things are recorded. For example, I myself read it somewhere when I started working in the areas of migration, that the first chunk of people that migrated from Nepal, as a migrant worker, okay, that was in 1984, something like that. So those things are being recorded. It is a different thing that with the time passing, the foreign migration or labor migration from Nepal became more systematic, and data, still we have a lot of problem with data, but data, data collection and data preservation has, it became, a bit better. Yeah.
Thank you, Ayubji. So another question is from Sanchalama. Why we import so much food from abroad, even though we're an agricultural economy?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. When I was home this time, I was, outraged by a statement by our Krishi Mantri, our agriculture minister, who said that um, Nepalese migrant workers will be, will have the opportunity to cast their votes in the next, in the upcoming elections. I was outraged by that statement. I was out, and I tweeted saying that, okay, the people sitting in Kathmandu, they hardly understand what is happening in the country. And I directed the tweet towards that minister, to that, and I know that it's never going to happen. So why we import these many things, agriculture producers from other countries, is basically this year Nepali farmers hardly found fertilizers. Nepali farmers hardly get seeds. Okay, these are hardly a thing of discussion here in Kathmandu, but that is the thing that farmers in our country, they struggle to. Okay, our agriculture minister is somebody who is known to be, okay, who is seen at least, okay, as an intellectual man, and at the midst of a crisis about something he's responsible, he's deviating that to somewhere else. He was supposed to provide fertilizer to farmers. His duty was that. His responsibility was that he was supposed to provide fertilizers. He was supposed to provide seeds. Okay, when he failed in that, he said that, okay, our migrant workers will be, okay, will have the opportunity to cast vote. I'm not saying that, or it's not my point that, okay, our migrant workers getting the opportunity to vote is something bad. Casting vote is a very pious thing, in a democracy. But the serious, the people who are working in that area, they know it very well that it is just a rhetorical thing. It's hardly going to happen, because India is a democracy. India has a lot of, huge influence to, on other countries. India has a clout, but are the Indian migrants, casting their votes? Of course not. Yeah, even, and majority of our workers are working in countries. The countries do not have any history or experience of, executing elections. So why they are going to initiate, okay, for us that thing? Why Qatar will, have any incentive to provide logistical arrangement for us, okay, for our 4 lakh people, to allow them cast their vote? And to everybody who is here, in case we don't know this thing, our embassies that are there, they are, severely understaffed. Okay, the embassies that are there just to kind of serve our people there, they are,
So you're saying when,
yeah.
So you're saying when the embassies are logistically not prepared themselves, like there is no question of.
Yeah, and I met some political representatives who work in those destination countries. Their only target is that to influence somehow the migrant worker to, to direct their family members who are here in Nepal to vote for their parties. This is something. I'm just bringing this example that we have ministers here in Nepal who, take the, debates or narratives in a completely irrelevant areas. His job was to ensure that farmers are getting fertilizers so that they can do their farming, so that we don't have to import from other countries. And at that time, he's saying that our migrant workers will have the opportunity to vote. And at the last minute, he came and he apologized. Okay, that, okay, I failed in that. But not getting fertilizer is not something that, okay, I have a guest at home and then I ordered pizza or biryani, and then at last minute the pizza guy or the delivery guy called me and saying that, okay, sorry sir, I can't bring you pizza or biryani, whatever. If I'm going to, whether I'm going to have fertilizer on time or not, I know that at least 3 months in advance. If I don't know that, then I do not have, then my credentials to be an agriculture minister is not that much. Okay?
So you're saying we're sort of just stuck in the politics of rhetoric, right?
we are stuck in the politics of rhetoric, where we are also party in that. I mean, we hardly focus on the issues that matter, that should matter to us.
I just want to quickly add, Ayubji, that the question we had earlier about your article in the record was from Pranika Koyu. And I'll take this other question, which is from Sumitra Bogatiji again. And she wants to know, there are sentiments that Nepali people should work in Nepal instead of migrating for work. Could you share your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, these days you can find many people who are giving up their works in the destiny. I mean, in those countries where they were working, and they are starting something here itself. No matter how small that is, but there are people. Excuse me. But there are people who started doing things here itself. For example, I mean, you'll find that so some areas have really picked up. For example, bakra farming, okay, the animal husbandry thing. So these things are kind of, earlier people were not willing to do these kind of things, but these days these things are becoming something, a reality. So there are, sentiments, and people are, interested in doing that.
Yeah, and I think also, I remember because, I remember watching some of these stories on local television about how some of the migrant workers would come back from certain countries where they had, they were able to bring the skill back to Nepal and actually set up their own businesses. And we have had some examples like that of young people bringing the skills back and, doing that here. I think, Ayubji, you have one more question from Pranika, and this is again related to your article on the record. Is it the responsibility of the consumers to make sure we are supporting our farmers? What can we do to make sure they have supplies and are getting paid for their work?
As a consumer, to the extent that I can see, we have very little agency to make that happen. In Kathmandu, we might be seeing that, okay, these outlets where it is claimed that these products are coming directly from consumer, and this is something that you have to do, to support them. So I don't know about, I'm not getting into that, because that is just, a very, very tiny thing, okay? In that way, that is just a symbolic thing. While, me being a farmer too, I still go to my farms, I still do things. Myself being a farmer, I have seen just 2 years ago, if farmers are provided these very basic things on time, okay, that in itself increases the productivity manifold. So that is something that governments must be doing. Okay, that is one key thing that should be government doing. For example, if somebody goes to my village, my Gaon Palika, or any other Gaon Palika that I have seen in Rupandehi, Kapilvastu, or Nolprasi, and says that if you elect me mayor here, I will give you fertilizers. Okay, most probably that person is going to win. So this is something of that importance to the farmers there. That is something which is must, that you, not as a farmer, but you as a citizen of this country, okay, by whatever means, try to influence government, okay, that they should ensure the adequate supply of these things to the farmers.
And it's an annual problem, from my experience of being a journalist, I remember we were reporting these in terms of the problems related to farming in terms of lack of fertilizers, but mostly fertilizers, but also other things. We were reporting them every year as though we had them marked on our calendars, Yeah. So it's a recurrent problem, and
exactly. Yeah, exactly. I would want to bring something here. When we are sitting here in Kathmandu, we see this across border movement, something in a very bad connotation. But if people, they don't, smuggle fertilizer from India, the state of being of this agriculture industry in Nepal, the agriculture would, practically will die. Okay, if the smugglers do not bring fertilizer from India. These are the smugglers who are, moving our agricultural economy. They bring fertilizers from India. Okay, and I was talking to, a very young man about their stories of how they bring it. So, they were sharing. They always go into, okay, there are two friends, and then they go, And what happened is that a policeman had kind of captured one of those
One of the
guys.
two.
Yeah, and then they were so smart. Then they brought the other guy. Yeah, brought another policeman, and they made those two policemen fight. And when those two policemen started fighting, then they just ran away. I mean, so to bring fertilizers from India, you have to be very smart too. It's not that okay, you can just do that. So these are the people who make sure that farmers are getting fertilizers. Okay, and
So
they are,
so our farmers are being, yeah, okay. Our agriculture in that region is being supported by smugglers, fertilizer smugglers,
yeah,
so to speak. So to speak.
yeah, yeah,
Um, Ayubji, I think I'm going to have to close this conversation soon, but I thought, because we didn't get to go into that entire topic at all, but I was also thinking, before closing, would you like to tell our audience about your upcoming essay on tutelage and what it is about?
uh, yeah. An essay of mine is coming in Routledge. That is about my conversation with a shopkeeper here in Kathmandu. So that shop is, exclusively caters to supplies that are being used in temples, okay, in worships. And somehow I happened to be in that shop, and I found that a Quranic verse is hanging in that shop. And initially I thought that, yeah, this might be for sale. And then when I inquired that it was about their belief and their faith in religiosity, so it was about that. And how, there I'm talking about the intersecting practices that are there, between Hindus and Muslims in Nepal. So I brought many examples in that, and I talked about how Hindus and Muslims are having similar practices. And once you are a person or an individual of faith, okay, that faith has intersection with with other faith groups too. And while going deeper in that, what I found is that it is about migration too. Once you are in in a different place, so it doesn't matter what your what are your sub identities. Okay, you create a different identity. For example, if you are in Qatar or in Saudi Arabia, whether you are Hindu or Muslim, that does not matter. You are just a migrant worker. I met many people who are Hindus here in Kathmandu. At times, people think that if you are a Muslim, you will get a better treatment. But I found equally number of Hindus as well who got very good treatment from their employers. So it becomes about a matter of how you conduct yourself. Okay. Uh, Likewise in Kathmandu, either you are Yadav, Teli, or a Muslim, or whoever, that does not matter much. You will call you will be called a Madheshi. So how these identities also became an important factor that brought those two people, an imam of the mosque and a shopkeeper who caters exclusively to temple supplies, how these two people became one people, and how they were how spiritually they got aligned to each other because they belong from the same village. So once you belong from the same village, irrespective of who you are, what you are, you become one people. So likewise, for example, I have never been to the West, but I have heard that thing from my friend that in USA as well, people say that Hindustani Pakistani bhai bhai. Okay, while if you are in India or in Pakistan, that connotation goes completely different. So being a migrant in a place that gives you a different identity, and your other identities uh, get suppressed, or you don't care about. So these are the things, these are the kind of things that I'm talking about in my article. I'm talking about the language things too in that article. So yeah, how people in the hill part of Nepal, they enjoy speaking Hindi. Okay, they enjoy watching or consuming Hindi drama, Hindi serials, or Hindi movies even. But when somebody who is of Madhesh origin kind of thing, okay, when that person speaks Hindi, that becomes a taboo. So these things are there. I'm talking about these things, that how things, how we have intersecting practices. Yeah.
Okay, we
And when
look
it
forward to
comes,
reading
yeah,
your
yeah,
essay. Yes, Ayub.
please, please.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time here today. And yeah, I've taken on more time than I had actually requested you for, but that's also because we received quite a number of questions, and I think it was interesting to also respond to our audiences. So I really want to thank our audience for asking the questions and for keeping this discussion engaging. On behalf of my team, the Sunday Sessions team, Vishal, Shafali, Suvani, and Pranab, Ayubji, I want to thank you for joining our conversation today. And I also want to mention that Sunday Sessions is brought to you by Book Pass, and it's one of the 9 spaces of the US Embassy. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much,
Ayubji, would you like to do your closing?
Yeah, thank you so much, Prateebha. I thoroughly enjoyed this. Thank you so much, our audience. I enjoyed your questions. Thank you. Thank you for being there. Sorry, I mean, for some reason I bumbled today, but yeah, that's all right. Yeah, thank you for having me here.
Okay, thank you, Ayubji, and thank you everybody for joining us here today. I think we'll definitely have another round of conversation in the future sometime with Ayubji around Madhey's identity. That's something that I've always found very, very interesting, because some of my closest friends are from that region, and I've had these really important conversations on the topic with them, and I was hoping to also talk to Ayubji about it today, but we don't have enough time. Yeah, but definitely another round at some point in the future. Thank you, Ayubji, and yes, bye-bye from Sunday Sessions for now.
Thank you so much. Bye.